Curiosities and Discoveries, Communicating Science Effectively. This panel features seasoned professionals who have not only ignited curiosity and shared groundbreaking discoveries, but have also strategically championed causes for agricultural organizations and nonprofits. Content designed for communicators who are called to share the stories of evolutions in science and environmental impacts. Moderating this session is Chelsea Thomas, a scholarly assistant professor at Murrow with more than 15 years of strategic communication experience in both the academic and industry realms. Her expertise centers in social media and health promotion, with a focus on enhancing the two-way communication of science and health-related content to target audiences through simplified communication, digital tools, and strategies. She holds a BA in communication from Murrow College and an MS in technical communication from Montana Tech of the University of Montana. Please welcome Chelsea.
Stand so that I hope everyone in the back can hear me. That was a really nice introduction. Being here, I want to welcome you to the Murrow Symposium. We hope you enjoy all of your morning segments and afternoon segments. Plenty of wonderful things to partake in and learn about. Ultimately, the variety of sessions should be fantastic. So again, my name is Chelsea Thomas. I'm a scholarly assistant professor in the Murrow College with a focus on health communication and science communication. And I'm honored or moderator on this panel. And we have a wonderful panel of guests here today. And in this session, these four incredible panelists, starting over here with Jana Fishback, Lori Maricle, Eric Sorensen, and Sara Zaske. I'll actually give them an opportunity to introduce themselves here shortly. Today's science communication field is expansive, dynamic, and nuanced. Each of these panel members are really aware of this cultural and are very extensive in their experience and their ability to dynamically work in that field. They have established themselves as credible, powerful voices in the field, and their backgrounds are impressive. There is much to learn from each of their successful journeys. So I'm excited for you to have the chance to do so. In the context of this conversation, I think it's really important to note that we will be addressing curiosities and successes and discoveries, as is noted in the science communication panel title, and both in the theoretical and applied context. So you'll see some theory and some applied, and ultimately each of them have applied it in their own lives in industry and they try to navigate this challenging and dynamic landscape and all the shifts, and do so with confidence, eagerness, and flexibility. And perhaps provide a roadmap to success for all of you. So we're going to dedicate this time to our knowledgeable professionals and conversational Q&A format. Ultimately, I'd like for this to be very casual and, of course, open the floor to all of you so that you have an opportunity to ask questions. And if at any point you have questions as the moderator, as the panelists are speaking, please feel free to raise your hand. And as we're able to in a fluid way, we'll be sure to get to you to ask that question so that it can be answered. Okay. Our session ultimately, and our goal is learning through candid, experiential, and open conversation, and them sharing their expertise with you with the goal of growth ultimately. So now I'd like to pass the baton and allow each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk about their background and expertise. So with that, we'll start over here with Jana.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Jana Fish. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit called Sustainable NCW based in Wenatchee, Washington. I founded that organization in fall of 2017, and our mission is to promote a culture of environmental stewardship and social sustainability in the North Central Washington area. We do that by inspiring and educating our community to live more sustainable lives. I went to WSU and graduated with my degree in communication with public relations in 2008. I came to WSU, actually thought I was going to be a pharmacy major. And so I did take a lot of science classes in my freshman and sophomore year before I changed majors, which was a nice foundation to get some of that basic science. And I ended up actually falling in love with a pre-pharmacy major here and marrying a pharmacist. So it's kind of funny. So I graduated in 2008 with my degree here. And as you're probably familiar, it was like the height of the Great Recession, very difficult to get a career. But I kind of worked around Washington State a little bit in various things before going back to school and getting my master's in environmental studies at the Evergreen State College while I was at WSU here, actually as a student at the Rec Center, I started learning about environmental issues and getting really interested in climate change, which was not a new thing in 2007, but was kind of starting to come up more and more. And I was learning about it for the first time. And so I knew that was what I wanted to study when I eventually went back to school and got my master's degree. After that, I worked for a while on the west side at Tacoma, at Metro Parks Tacoma, as a sustainability coordinator, and then moved back to my hometown of Wenatchee and started my nonprofit. I worked for the first 6 years of my nonprofit as an executive director there and was the only staff member for a while. So I did everything, including a lot of communication. And now I'm the climate action coordinator. So my communication roles kind of ebb and flow. Right now, I'm really into grant writing and kind of project management. And then after those projects are done, my communication piece will pick up as we do more in community engagement. So I do a little bit of everything in that role as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Lori, would you mind going next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lori Maricle. I am the communications director for the Washington Green. So I'm really excited to get to meet you. I feel like we need to be friends. I WSU grad. My degree was also public relations. I thought finishing my degree that I was going to work in an agency and it was going to be glamorous and I was going to live in New York, and that is not what happened at all. I graduated in 2006, and I had actually deferred my graduation so that I could study abroad. And so that is my the 3 pieces of advice I try to tell all students is, if you can at all swing it, study abroad. It's amazing. You don't even have to learn another language. I was in London, and it was fantastic, a really great experience. But when I came back from that, I had maxed out a credit card and I needed a job right away. So the first job that I could get was actually with Washington State University. Not working in communications, I was with their human resources department. So I started my career doing human resources. However, for me, I think that was an amazing foundation for learning business and learning how to run a department and manage people. That was an amazing foundation for me, especially as when I went back into communications. It gave me a really great beginning and education on how to talk up to my boss. So you start your career, you're going to be working probably in a communications department. Your manager will have a communications degree, but as you advance, my boss now is a CEO. She does not have a degree in communications. So a lot of what I do is pitch, sell the communications function and to my boss and with internally to make sure that we're matching our campaigns and our strategies and tactics with actually our business objectives. So that was a really great foundation for me. During that time, I went back to school and I got a degree in business also, but I was, like I said, working in HR. I was reviewing position descriptions, very menial, very tedious task. A communications job came across my desk, and I said to myself, man, that's the kind of job I want. So the plan is kind of aligned for me, and I watched for it to go through the budget process. So when it posted online, I applied for it, and I've been working in communications ever since. That job was with the College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. So I worked for them for 7 years, and that was the foundation of my science experience. I'm also very excited to be here today because Eric Sorensen was one of my first science writing mentors when I worked at WSU. So he helped me out a lot communicating that complex technical stuff. So after working at WSU for 10 years, I spent 2 years working in Olympia at the Association of Washington Business. That's the State Chamber of Commerce. It's the Manufacturing and Technology Association for the state. So again, a different kind of a side, very technical also. And then in 2021, I had the really awesome opportunity to return to Spokane for the role that I'm in now. So we're talking about agriculture and a completely new industry, but also very science focused.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And now Eric.
Thank you. I did not study abroad. I did live in New York.
Oh, okay.
I went to journalism school, way back when and was came from the news side, not the science side. I have a love-hate relationship with science. It's a little smelly. They use big words, and a lot of the time they're really boring. I graduated into a job that probably doesn't exist anymore, and that was town reporter for the Patriot Ledger out south of Boston in Quincy, Mass. I mean, no one's covering school board meetings anymore. I covered a lot.
They are in Wenatchee.
Oh, that's good to hear. I at one point I was bored with that job, and my wife said, "Wonderfully, I'll give you 3 years for an adventure. It apply anywhere in the country for a newspaper job." And this newspaper in Spokane had a position as the Palouse bureau chief, working out of this little college town called Pullman. And I bought a colleague's VW bus, drove out here, worked first out of my home and then out of the Puffer Belly Depot, the train station downtown. And I could cover anything I wanted between Othello and Weippe. I just drove that thing, my van, all over the place, talked to a lot of farmers, but came up the hill a lot, as I called it, and did a lot of news stories built around the science being done at WSU. And I realized that this is a job opportunity. There's a lot of science going on. At WSU, they spend $350 million a year trying to figure out things that are new. And I kind of like that. I went to the Seattle Times, became a science writer there, but always came from the side that said, where is the news here? What are some of the fundamental values, news that are in this story? And I tried to downplay the big words. If I had to introduce more than one new word and a definition for it, I knew I was going to be losing readers. And I kind of mined that for quite a while. I did it at the Times. I did it for a nonprofit that did environmental work. I did it for Seattle University. And then I came here and wrote for the WSU Magazine and their news service. And it was a good gig. But Sara's now kind of has the job that I used to have.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm the WSU lead science writer. I had these big shoes to fill when I started here. 4 years. Throughout my career, I've kind of gone back and forth between journalism and higher education. So I've worked for 2 other universities. I got my start in journalism. I should preface too that I have 2 English literature degrees. And I'm probably the only fellow graduates that is using English in their career and that quite that way. But I got introduced to journalism because I got a job as the only reporter at the Castro Valley Forum. And I covered not only school board meetings, but the utility district and whatever meetings they had. And from there, I got hired at the San Francisco Examiner, worked my way up from the San Mateo County to the big city, which is an experience. I married a scientist, so I had to follow him, and we ended up in Oregon. That's how I went to Oregon State, and we ended up in Germany for his postdoc. And so that's where I did a lot of freelancing, and oddly enough, was where my career really took off. I wrote one article about how it was different to parent in Germany than it is in America. It went viral, and that became a book. So that opened a lot of doors for me. I had been writing for technology publications, that's sort of science writing, but it was basically translating for an American audience what the Germans were doing for tech, which was fun. But after that, I've been in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Time.com, a whole bunch of places. Came back here, started working at University of Idaho, and luckily this man decided to leave his job and I applied for it. I really enjoy what I do because there are very few jobs where you get to write on such a variety of topics. And every day I get to learn. Sometimes I'm one of the first people who hears outside of the lab members, and I get to help bring that to a wide audience. So yeah, that's my story.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all. So I'd like to start either broadly or narrowly. I'm not sure where we'll land. but I'm trying to define science communication. And I know each of you come from different facets of the field. And so what I'd like to do is either you or all of you, if you prefer, give your definition of what science communication is as it relates to today's field and what people are currently working on.
You're in today's field.
The definition of today's field is well, I think my job is to take what is fairly technical and translate into an accessible language. First off, I wish I could take everything that was very technical and make it accessible. I have to first find what might be interesting to a regular audience, and that is not everything. And that is not often what is the most breakthrough and considered in the science field. I think that other folks who have worked in institutional communications has become more because science journalism is dying along, unfortunately, with a lot of journalism. Very few newspapers keep science writers anymore. The one bright spot in that is we've noticed is starting to keep climate science reporters. Maybe a little too late, but at least doing it now. So there's a little bit more interest into topics that we couldn't get attention for before. I had hard selling climate change 5-6 years ago. But now, you get enough wildfires and heat domes, and then suddenly people are interested. So I see the science field a lot in flux. I mean, I don't want to be too negative here, but this last year or two, we just saw National Geographic fire all its staff. Popular Science has shut its regular magazine. So it's changing. It means there might be some sort of rebirth, I hope. People are definitely interested. We've got a lot of challenges out there.
Venture.
Yeah, I think it's kind of in flux. I'd be interested to hear what other folks have.
Yeah, I can just share with my view of science communication is, mine's at kind of a small level. I'm communicating with a community, and I think about it a little bit more rather than like a one-way communication as a conversation. We do a lot of community engagement and outreach, and I try to portray myself as a fellow community member. Often what I'm communicating about is climate science, or trying to encourage behavior change by communicating and so it's not quite as lighthearted as Discoveries and Curiosities. It's often like, heavy stuff. And so really kind of, meeting the community where they're at and trying to understand what they're interested in, I think is kind of what I do.
So fantastic.
Yeah.
And so on that note, I'd like to step back a little bit and talk about
Venture.
Understanding of science, as you mentioned, the communication. And in order to get that two-way communication, oftentimes we have to talk about why something matters, right? So from your perspectives, why does science communication matter? Why is it important in the broader scope of the field today?
Well, I think Sara really hit on it when she said it was translating. So I feel like science communication
Venture.
is a lot of what is translate. So the wheat, small grains industry, we have a trade publication in Washington. It's Wheat Life magazine. So I'm a managing editor for that. I produce that magazine every month, and a lot of it is translating the research that comes out of WSU, SDA, Agricultural Research Service, translating that into an actionable production practice for farmers. So how can they take the advancements in knowledge that we're getting at the university and apply that to their farming and become more sustainable in the process and use less chemicals. And so we've got that audience, and then it's also telling the general public about what we're doing there and connecting that with why that matters. They're not going to care about a heat dome until all of a sudden it's 104 degrees and connecting with how that's going to eventually impact their lives. And that's, I feel like science explains in the world why this phenomena occur and you get to be the one that connects those dots with the general or a wider audience on how that could potentially impact their lives. So in that aspect, I feel like science communication is one of the most important, because you get to help with that, advancing that understanding.
Absolutely.
I think why it matters is going to vary on a case-by-case basis. And when I used to work with different environmental groups, we'd have a kind of scoping session or something about communications or a story that one would be working on. We'd do an exercise where we'd say, what matters to you, just in general? And we'd do a positive list and a negative list, and it would be love, power, money, responsibility. It would go down, and you can see if you took a piece of research or a scientist focused on one particular thing, you could say, all right, where are the values in this? They can be both the human values, and you can even go down the list of news values, which is, as much as I studied journalism, didn't realize there was a core set of journalistic values. The number of them varies, but if you just write 7 news values, 12 news values in Google, they'll pop up. It'll be topicality, relevance, impact. There'll be various ways in which you can process them. Keep in mind, and I did, this is one of the exercises I did. I would say, all right, here are all the news stories I did this year. And maybe I'm going to make this number up, 50. And then I'd look at how many faculty are on this venture. There's 2,000. Over time, realized that only about 2% of the scientists at this institution are going to be newsworthy in a given year. I mean, that's by my definition, but yeah. I think scientists should sit for a moment and say, okay, how am I newsworthy? Where does my work intersect with human values? And if I'm sitting next to somebody in an airplane, they say, what do you do? You can say that in 2 cents and resonate.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I absolutely. Because we have trouble getting attention for all the science, I don't know if there are any science students in this room. Each individual scientist needs to be kind of an advocate for their field. Another thing I wanted to mention is we're going through a crisis of trust, public trust in science right now. So that makes science communication even more important. And we kind of saw what happened with COVID is we saw people experiencing how science works in real time. And those people who understood that science is uncertain, I think might have been more comfortable with it. Whereas those who wanted a solid fact, were looking for that solid fact wherever they could find it, and maybe not in the great place. So another piece that I'd love to help do, I don't have a quite grasp on it, is to help educate every time I write how science works. And nothing is, absolutely certain, that it's a process. And we have to kind of sit with this is maybe how it is, or mostly how it is, if we just have this evidence.
Yeah.
So on that note, and Sara, I think
Venture.
even to this, what are some examples of times that you've either seen science communicated or communicated science yourself in a way that was successful, or perhaps unsuccessful, and why? Can you give examples of times that might have happened, and how you either would have done it better, or done something to mitigate challenges, or perhaps saw it done quite well and the public understood it nicely?
Just
Venture is
Eric has interesting.
venture.
I could talk about a couple easy failures.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I always trip over this because I love to talk about basic science, even though I know it's a hard sell. And especially if the researcher is really passionate about it and explains it really well, it actually probably doesn't matter how
Venture.
so I'm not going to blame myself entirely, but often I'll do this. It's a great story. It's fascinating, falls completely flat. And probably it is the problem of subject matter. Or maybe the story is really cut out for one reporter and not the big blast of a press release and get 20 reporters. Easy things like polar bears, they sell really well, and communicate that is easy. Leading with the findings, making sure that you got something new and novel up there, it usually works. And well, in the case of polar bears, something cute, cuddly, and relatable is good. And video, yeah, having imagery is huge.
That's good.
There's a lot of stories out there.
There are so many. Pick your favorite.
Yeah. No. You
Well,
go.
as far as video goes, video I think played into one of the biggest science wins that I've had as a, I guess, science writer. Was more of a PR space where I was able to successfully get one of our pharmacy faculty researchers on TV, 6 o'clock news in Spokane, and this was in March, right? March Magnus, and they gave him a 3-minute segment before they talked about Gonzaga basketball, and that was like end of my year. But he was talking about autophagy, which is not something many people know what that's about, but it's related to Alzheimer's. So their video team, though, was able to make a little animation as he was trying to describe what autophagy is and
Venture.
how that relates to Alzheimer's. And they came up with little brooms that went across the screen, sweeping your brain. So that's autophagy, helps clean plaque out of your brain. And when that process stops, the plaque builds up, and that leads to Alzheimer's disease. So he was trying a way to re-engage that process in Alzheimer's patients. So that fact that many people now are a lot more aware of Alzheimer's disease and how that can impact people's lives, they were able to help us with that visual through video. And it also helped that our researcher didn't use big words beyond autophagy, and he spoke very well with the journalist also. But that video piece was a big element to helping tell that story.
Awesome. Yeah, the use of metaphors is fantastic.
Yes.
Science communication, right? That's a great example. Awesome. Anyone else?
I have a fun one. When I first got here to Pullman to write about WSU, there was a National Science Foundation grant to look at the amount of methane that came out of reservoirs and lakes. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, 20 times worse than carbon dioxide. I thought it was really cool research. They started in Lake Vancouver. There was a student who found a way to track bubbles. Then they would measure the bubbles. And about 5 years later, they came out with a paper, in a pretty good publication. And it said the amount of methane coming off of the world's impounded waters, reservoirs, is equal to the entire greenhouse gas production of Canada. That's kind of a big deal. And it turned out that there's this news service called Eureka Alert that science writers like Sara and I we'd send them to Eureka Alert. They post it. Every science reporter in the country scans it every morning. But Eureka Alert was down that week. And so I took this very large database we have, and I just started saying, all right, who's writing about global warming and methane and reservoirs, and finding all these names. And then I did individual pitches to them. Got the Washington Post to write about it. Sent it to the Seattle Times. Linda Mapes, the environment reporter, called me up and said, hey, Eric, I'm interested in this because, they say dams are kind of carbon neutral, and I don't really, this is saying that's not true. So a day later, banner headline, front page of the Seattle Times, WSU, dams not carbon neutral. I was thinking, that's a good hit. That's a good story. But the Senate Majority Leader, who was a farmer, and pro-dam, because there are 4 dams down on the Snake River that are used to help ship grain down to Portland. He called up the head of government relations for WSU and said, what's this doing here? She calls up the head of research for WSU and says, how'd this happen? He comes into my office and says, how did the Seattle Times get this story? And I said, well, we produce news releases. We put them out there. And I don't know what the lesson of all this is. I guess it's that there's a hurly-burly out there. When things matter, they become controversial. If it's not controversial, you might ask yourself, does it really matter? And I stood my ground. on it. I didn't back off. There was nothing wrong with the story, but I was in hot water, and I just had to live with that. I wouldn't do it differently. I'm kind of glad I did it. So, oh, we have
Yes, question.
I guess a follow-up question about I guess being stuck in letters. I'm curious about
venture.
to convey that information because it's not quite that error when you send me an article about the players. And so if any you file with us take stuff away needing this thing you want. I go to where this can be that's a way
Venture.
is very serious ways that don't hurt in ways that bring in readers and like one step conversation that bringing.
But I should clarify that the polar bear story with climate change, and
They're all dying.
they're all dying. Yeah, and that was actually a way to kind of engage people in climate change that is better than or more tangible to them than talking about CO2 in the atmosphere. But that is one way, is to look for that avenue. But yeah, people get alarmist fatigue, and we talk about this a lot with climate change researchers. What can we do about it? Because if we just talk about how bad climate change is, people tend to shut down. It's done, it's over, there's nothing we can do. What's great about some of the researchers at WSU is that they're often thinking about solutions even as they're discovering the problem. For example,
Venture.
had a story come out about how climate change is going to make colonies collapse more because they wear themselves out in the fall, longer flying, and then they hibernate or go dormant for a while.
Venture.
And then when they wake up again, they're old and they're dying and there are not enough of them to survive. So WSU found that out, and then they also found a possible mitigation by placing hives in cold storage. So that's one way that I try to help keep the engagement there on negative topics.
Yeah, no news is good news, right? It happens, and gosh, we love it.
I know.
It's true.
I remember I'm going to use a profane word here, but they caught the Green River Killer many years ago, and I was in the basement of the Seattle Times, and an editor rang down on these little Nextel walkie-talkies we would carry, and she said, "Eric, where are you?" And I said, "I'm looking at a snack machine here in the basement." And she goes, "They caught the Green River Killer." Holy shit. It's just like, that was one of the worst things happened in the state. Well, catching him, I guess, was a good thing. To Sarah's point, when I would write about bad things, we'd often try to get aware of the solutions here. But to journalism's detriment, that solution section was generally the last thing in the narrative, and it was the first thing to get cut. So struggle to get the solutions out there. Do your best.
Well, as a PR practitioner, I try to put that in the first paragraph
That's good.
to make it cut.
Yeah.
But a big challenge that I have in communicating science is that there is often multiple perspectives to approach a story. Just like methane in reservoirs on the dams, our industry relies on the dams. And so it's a job to point out that a lot of methane producing reservoirs are in tropical climates where there's a lot of plant matter in the water already. And so the dams that are in Washington actually don't produce that as much methane as a lake in the Amazon. So that kind of getting people open to different perspectives, so it's not just one answer, is a big challenge. And what I do every day. And then there was another example that I was going to talk about, and I completely forgot about it. So
It'll come back.
yeah.
I would say for me, a lot of my communication about climate, in the end, really trying to have some sort of behavior change. And I've found that in my community, which is politically conservative and hesitant to mitigate and actually do things to reduce our community's emissions, it resonates more to talk about climate resilience and how we can adapt. And that's not always what I want to do. I want to address the problem and, reduce our community's emissions. But it's easier to point at some of the extreme weather events, whether that's fire or smoke or extreme heat. And that resonates more because they've seen that firsthand. And then you can encourage that behavior change of becoming more fire-wise and adapting in that regard. In terms of when I'm communicating about trying to mitigate emissions, what I try to do sometimes is pair the information with something they might care about. So maybe this individual doesn't care about their emissions, but they care about saving money, or they care about their communities, like the children's health in the community. And so maybe they don't care about gas emissions that's going to warm the entire planet, but they do care about like local toxic fumes coming from exhaust. So an anti-idling campaign, for example, where you're asking people to stop idling unnecessarily. Maybe you don't even talk too much about, the greenhouse gas emission piece, but you say you're wasting money, you're getting 0 miles per gallon, and you're, producing these toxic fumes that are really bad for the school kids at drop off or whatever it might be. So trying to find things that they actually care about, because you're not going to, not everyone's going to care about climate, unfortunately.
Yes. Know your audience if you can, for sure.
That'd be
Questions?
It's just led right into something that I just keep thinking about as you're talking about this, because in communications, obviously, we do a lot more than social science. So there's this division. I want to couple it in with science itself, but I know that it's its own separate thing too. So how often does that come into play for you? Do you find that you actually need to find that social science research to help maybe get your message out for science? And does that happen a lot? Do you see the marriage between the two happening? Because I think a lot of us here are the communications, where we're doing the studies behavior change is what's important, right? So we're going off of a lot of that stuff. So do you find that you bring that into your communicating of science?
Yes. I think a lot for educating about agriculture and why it's important, and giving people, your reader, a call to action, something that they can do. Climate change is very dire. These are the small things that you can do about it, because clearly one person isn't gonna tip the scale on the global warming, but you can personally make a change that's 1% better. And if we all do 1%, then add up. So always finding, that's why I say know your audience, so that maybe you can connect with what motivates them and try to connect those dots a little bit better, so that they have a better sense of, science communication, that's all about making sure that more people are more aware of how their individual actions can impact others and the environment and all of that as well. And our farmer audience is a really high impact audience. So anything that we can do to help them, there's a lot of farming practices that they've been doing for generations that are considered more sustainable, but more and more people to adopt technology, precision agriculture, those kinds of things. If a farmer can be 3% more efficient with their chemical use, that also helps their bottom line. So it helps their business be more sustainable also, so that their children can have a profession if they choose to take over the farm. So connecting those dots and with your audience is very important.
You had a question back there?
Yeah, question. Yes, I enjoy the tend to find those online videos, because I'm guiding up where they have been of meeting interests, they speak ratio, which is advertising, and an editorial position where it writes up a recent story that doesn't name that industry, but you still run your bit as a journalist.
Venture.
Mr. Sorensen.
Yeah, I had things that industry might not have liked, but I just put it out anyway, and I would not. That I'm unusual that way, and I'm, to my detriment, when I was in here, well, it was a habit conditioned out of being a reporter. When you're a reporter, you're much the voice. You go out, you get the information, you write it. Your editor is probably going to give it a pretty light touch, and so you own the day. I got into an institutional environment, I still took this one riot, one ranger approach where I just said, I'm going to write it, I'm going to put it out. I did not do a whole lot of consultation. I didn't make sure every stakeholder. So in fact, when that damn story ran, one of my colleagues in the government relations office said, by the way, have you thought about the impact of this on our stakeholders? And it was like, no. That this is a piece of breaking scientific information. It deserves to be out there. And the stakeholders kind of, well, that was their business then to go fix. And at one point I talked to somebody, like a week later, I was talking about somebody at Bonneville Power Authority, which is, ground zero for energy in the Northwest. And I said, I'm sorry, did you get upset about that thing? And he goes, it's just another day. It's Tuesday. There were other people who were like, can we see that study, please? And so
Yeah, lots of questions. Yeah, go ahead. On that. I work for Puget Sound Energy.
yes.
So we're in the thick of it right now. But when you were writing that story, did you not think to call BPA, have them be part of it, get more perspectives? So that's what I see right now is reporters have to work on 3 or 4 stories a day. They're just cranking. They can't get hold of it. They need to. And the people in the story, fewer and fewer voices. And so the perspective. So I'm asking, it was about, why wasn't BPA?
If I were at a newspaper, that definitely would have been the order of the day. I mean, and there was even a point 20 years ago when you wrote about global warming, the editor would come in, well, what's the other side of this? Like, there's only 2 sides. And then you'd have to go to somebody who, a denier, and it was extremely frustrating. But yeah, calling BPA, calling Puget Sound, that would have been pro forma. When you're attached to an institution, you're kind of hitting them with your best shot. And it's for the who are picking up your stuff to go out and do the rest of that housekeeping.
Yeah. I think over here we have one that will go here and then share with that.
Yeah, assistant professor of public relations, and teaching actually science communication to STEM major students here.
Okay, that's great.
So I actually active like highly encourage the students to come here because these are really awesome opportunity. So when I'm teaching science communication to STEM majors, and then I want to actually know more about how actually scientists can communicate with well, sometimes the general audience, sometimes it's to the target audience of the specific group or community. But you guys have, I think, like lots of experience with communicating the science probably with the student scientists, I think. So what would you advise, like, what would be kind of the tip for them to be a good communicator on the science or future scientist?
My favorite question is you ask your question and then say, now explain. And I think I got this from you, actually. Make me like I'm a 4th grader. That is my favorite qualifier to any question that I ask a subject matter expert. And then it's a matter of using some metaphors. If you know your audience, I was thinking about describing what I do, and it's kind of like for me, it's like green smoothies. It's you put your spinach in your smoothie, so it's not as obvious that you're eating your vegetable communication to me. So that right there, that's how I communicate science. It wouldn't maybe land as well with an audience if I said it's like, broccoli in the casserole, so your kids will eat the vegetables. You guys might relate more to the green smoothie. So those kinds of metaphors, relational things, but yeah, keeping it simple. I really like the Einstein quote: "If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough."
That's a great one.
So yeah, and sometimes it takes some time, which is a challenge if you're a science writer and you're on a deadline. But for me, I think a lot of the wins, the biggest wins that I've had have been something where I will put together an outline, maybe a series of articles, and then I'll send it to as many people as I can think of and get their feedback so that it's not just me and my blind spots writing this series. I get more, like when you're driving a car and you have the blind spot indicators. Yeah. So,
Right. So question here, and here, and I know we have about 5 minutes. Try and go expediently. Go ahead.
As a PR major myself, and my topic kind of relates to their question, but I think the general public kind of has view of the science professionals, so that scientists, engineers, that they're intimidating or that kind of stuff. They use a lot of jargon that the public doesn't understand. It kind of makes them a little unapproachable, and it kind of makes it hard to have that trust when communicating with them. And I was just wondering, in your experience, is there any instances or examples where maybe that's the most kind of true
Venture.
hard time talking to bank assistant engineer or communicating with them effectively, and how did you navigate that? Great question.
I think the metaphor I had been using was, imagine telling this to a kid at your dinner table. Keep in mind, a dismally high percentage of the American public has only a 6th grade reading level. So you want to speak in those terms. Scientists, while they're intimidating, are also one of the most respected professions. When they speak, they're treated as close to the truth. So it's really just a matter of getting scientists to speak directly, simply, kick out the jargon. And you can do exercises on this. You can do the practice elevator speeches. Like if I was in your class, I would have students break out in twos and say, all right, you have 5 minutes, explain your research to this person, and then give that person notes on it. You can work on it. You can get better.
Yeah. 3-minute thesis, 5-minute thesis.
Yeah.
It's sometimes as simple as making them practice answering the question, what do you do?
Yeah.
And being able to answer that very succinctly.
And why does it matter?
Yeah. Why does it matter?
Why should I care?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So a couple more minutes. Question here, and then I think Dan, you had a question as well.
I was just curious about like the overall industry of talking with scientists, researchers, because I've taken a class here at WSU, Communicating Science and Technology, which was essentially transcribing research journals, which was very fascinating. But when working with engineers and physicists,
Venture.
there was a lot of collision, and it sort of felt like they didn't understand my role as the comms student in our group. So I was wondering what advice you have for when you hit that roadblock of you don't really think they respect your role.
Comms gets no respect. It's really hard. I mean, this is an institution built around structural elitism. It's written in their processes. You have to have a PhD to apply for job X. And a lot of the people who have those, they wear it with pride and a lack of humility. So it's really hard to be a journalism student in particular. You don't even have a credential yet, and you're knocking on that door. You're sending an email, followed up with a phone call, and it's I'm not sure how to. It's a public relations problem that this direct one-on-one thing of put them at ease somehow. If you are very well read in their subject, I mean, bone up, but before you go in there, look up the definitions of the things you don't understand, and then have a moment where you just say, hey, come on, can you just explain this in really simple terms for me? They are professional educators at the same time. So try and get that educator part to turn on, because they're telling stuff to classes all the time.
Yeah. And have confidence in your question. Understand it. Chances are your audience won't either. So it is a legitimate question, and they're not explaining it well enough. So I would keep at it. And I often, if they're really obtuse and I think I've got it, I will say, so is it like this? And then they'll go, oh, and they'll try again.
Yeah.
So I just kind of keep coming back at it. Yeah.
Fact check. It's the most, and Do it any way possible. Get their cell number and say, I'm going to call you anytime, day or night, because I'm going to make sure, no matter what, that this is right when it goes out. And you'll get a lot more respect from them, and you'll sleep better before the piece comes out.
So I know it's 11. We have time for one last question quickly.
Quickly, so finding the eyeballs and the ears in a fractured media landscape. Talk about Seattle Times, CPS. Is that still where you're finding the most success with traditional media outlets to get the word out? Or have you found a non-traditional source or a new media source in which you can get your message out, not maybe as successfully or as widely, but that's where you're headed? Maybe organically through your own YouTube channel, or are there ways to get the message out that are hitting people, but you're still trying to find all the eyeballs and that are as fractured as that?
Well, social media is still pretty powerful. And we find that a lot of our reporters they don't open their emails. They may not look at Eureka Alert. Sometimes if you look at it on Eureka, there's photos and video, but they saw it on the Twitter feed, which I find a little depressing, but it still works. And I tell faculty that as well a lot. Maybe I can't put a press release out on it. If you want to get some eyeballs on it, maybe you have a Twitter feed. Some of our most successful researchers are tweeting about their work a lot, and they have followers.
So, what about in your space?
Yeah, well, for what I do, I try to keep it as local as possible, as relevant as possible. So it's a smaller community, but there's all these sorts of kind of fascinating, interesting environmental, things coming out.
Venture.
New things or topics that people are really interested in. But I always try to bring it back to how does this affect us locally, just to make sure it's the very most relevant as possible. So when I write for the Little Wenatchee World sometimes, but there has to be a local piece because I don't want it to just be a generic environmental topic, and so that's how I try to keep them interested.
All right. Well, I know we're over time, so thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you